You twist the salt shaker over your plate and the grains fall like dust. Harmless, right? Cheap? Ordinary. But there was a time when those same grains could save a life, or start a fight, or keep an entire city from starving. Which is kind of wild when you think about it. As we move through this story, you'll hear comparisons without even trying to study them. More valuable than silver, less common than gold, as necessary as water. The grammar slips in quietly. No pressure, just listening. And if this already feels different from a normal history lesson, maybe send it to someone who cooks a lot. Seriously, when was the last time you added salt without even noticing? At dinner, salt just sits there, near the edge of the table, waiting. It doesn't beg for attention. You grab it, twist, sprinkle, done. The food suddenly tastes complete. That's how salt works in life too. Always there, rarely appreciated. But long ago, it wasn't quiet at all. Salt meant power, safety, survival. As the people didn't use it for flavor first, they used it so food wouldn't rot. Rot means it smells awful and can make you sick. Without salt, winter could kill you. Travel could kill you. Hunger was closer than you'd like. So when people say salt was once worth more than silver, that isn't poetic exaggeration. Silver could sit in a chest and shine. Salt could keep your child alive. Big difference. Picture a world without refrigerators. No plastic wrap, no clean grocery stores. Just heat, dust, bugs. And time. And time ruins food fast. In that world, salt wasn't seasoning. It was protection, a barrier between you and starvation. This isn't only a story about salt. It's about how humans protect life in the simplest ways. Long before cities, people watched animals. Deer, goats. They kept returning to certain muddy patches. Not pretty places, but they licked the ground there. They were after minerals. Natural elements the body needs to function. Humans noticed. Humans copied. Plus they tasted the soil, found salt in rocks, discovered that when seawater dries under the sun, white crystals stay behind. Little hard shapes. Nothing fancy, but powerful. Salt became knowledge. Parents showed children where to find it, how to collect it, how to keep it dry. Because wet salt is useless. Honestly. Some communities boiled salty water in clay pots over small fires. The water slowly disappeared. White crystals remained. That small pile, unimpressive to look at, could change an entire year for a family. In ancient China, rulers understood this fast. Control salt, control money. Control money, control armies, roads, power, simple math, and they took it seriously. People drilled deep into the ground using bamboo tubes, hollow plant stems that acted like pipes. It was slow work, dangerous. Tunnels could collapse, air could turn bad, but salt meant profit. Extra money from trade and profit meant influence. From far west in Egypt, salt lived a different life. It preserved fish and meat. It helped prepare bodies for burial. It even had a spiritual role. People believed it protected the dead in the next world. It cleaned wounds. It cleaned skin. It touched daily life and sacred ritual at the same time. Salt was everywhere. Kitchen, temple, market. Then we reached the Mediterranean. The sea became a highway. Ships carried wine, oil, metal. And salt. Always salt. Not because it sparkled. Because armies needed it. An army eats every day. If food spoils, soldiers weaken. When they sweat, and soldiers sweat a lot, they lose salt, lose too much, and the body struggles. Muscles cramp, strength fades. So Rome planned around salt. Roman towns stored it. Roman soldiers depended on it. Roman roads moved it across distances that still impress people today. There's an old story that Roman soldiers were partly paid in salt, which is where salary supposedly comes from. Now, the details aren't perfectly clear. History rarely is. But salt was absolutely tied to money and military life. That part isn't debate. And where armies go, trade follows. Always. Outside Rome ran the Via Salaria, literally the salt road. Merchants walked it. Donkeys carried heavy loads. Men stared at the sky, worried about rain turning paths into thick mud that swallowed wheels and feet. You can almost hear it. Leather straps creaking, wooden carts knocking against stones. Tired animals breathing hard. And tension. Because salt was small, valuable, easy to steal. A sack of salt didn't look like treasure, but it was. High demand makes things expensive. Thieves knew that. So traders moved in groups, hired guards, took longer routes just to stay safe. Here's where comparisons feel real. Salt was lighter than grain, but often worth more. Less shiny than silver, but more useful on a freezing night. As necessary as water on long journeys. In a different way, but just as vital. In town markets, people handled salt carefully. They smelled it, tasted it, asked where it came from. Sea salt, rock salt, lake salt. Small differences mattered. Some salt was sharp, some dirty. Some formed into solid blocks, easier to carry without spilling everywhere. In parts of Africa, those blocks became currency. Real currency. Cloth, gold, livestock, traded for salt. In desert regions where salt was rare, hard to find, it felt like treasure. A man walking beside a camel might think about home, about warm food, about rest. And maybe he'd touch a chunk of salt and feel security. Because he knew what it could buy, what it could preserve, what it meant. And here's the hard part. The people closest to salt often suffered most. Miners inhaled dust, their hands split open, their backs bent. Many died young. Their work fed cities they'd never see. That's one of those uncomfortable truths in history. Comfort on the table often comes from someone else's pain. Still, humans kept going. They built roads, boats, markets, rules. I've always found that incredible. Even in rough conditions, people try to make life easier for the next generation. That instinct, it's surprisingly strong. Empires rose, empires fell, Rome weakened, trade routes shifted, local rulers took over, chaos in some places. And salt remained important, because no matter who wore the crown, families still needed preserved food. Kings fought, parents cooked. So, as the ancient world shifted toward the medieval one, salt didn't fade away. If anything, it became more controlled, more taxed, more fought over. And that's where things get complicated and interesting. Because once governments realized how powerful salt was, they locked it behind laws. And once something necessary gets locked behind a law, well, history tends to get messy. The medieval world didn't feel like the ancient one at all. Castles rose where Roman stones had crumbled. Villages clung to rivers. Church bells told people when to wake, when to pray, when to sleep. Life slowed down in some ways, but control tightened in others. And salt, it stepped into a new role. The rulers in parts of Europe decided they alone could sell it, not share it. Not compete over it, own it. That meant ordinary people couldn't just collect salt or trade it freely anymore. They had to buy it from official sellers. Prices could climb. Quality could drop. Didn't matter. You still had to pay. France had the gabelle, a salt tax that people genuinely hated. Families were forced to buy a fixed amount every year, even if they didn't need it. Even if they were struggling. The law didn't care. When something essential gets taxed heavily, you feel it. A few more coins leave your pocket. Fewer stay. For wealthy families, it was annoying. For poor ones, it hurt. Honestly, it probably felt heavier than the salt itself. Smugglers showed up, of course. They always do. These were people who moved salt in secret to avoid the tax. Night walks through forests, bags hidden under clothes, quick deals in quiet corners, risky stuff. If caught, fines, jail, sometimes worse. With salt still looked the same, small, white, almost innocent, but tension followed it everywhere. At the same time, some cities got rich from it. Venice is the obvious example. A city floating on water, turning trade into power. Salt moved through its ports along with wine and silk. Venice didn't just sell salt. It used salt to strengthen its grip on trade routes. And that grip meant influence, real influence. Steady salt income funded ships. Ships protected trade. Trade funded soldiers, but soldiers protected the city. It's all connected. Up north, in places like Poland, miners dug deep underground. In Wieliczka, near Krakow, tunnels stretched for miles. Cool air, dark spaces. Over time, those tunnels turned into something strange and beautiful. Workers carved entire chapels out of salt. Real chapels, walls, altars, statues. Men prayed underground, surrounded by salt, praying for safety from the very thing that fed their town. There's something almost haunting about that. I've always thought that's the strange part of history. The same thing can save you and endanger you. Trade expanded and differences became obvious. A coastal town had easier access to salt than a mountain village. A village near a mine paid less than a town far away. Geography shaped price. Price shaped daily life. More access meant cheaper salt. Less access meant higher cost. Simple but powerful. Salted fish and salted meat became everyday food in many homes. During long winters, these weren't luxury items, they were survival. Kids grew up associating that salty taste with security. A stocked storage room meant you'd likely make it to spring, but too much salt damaged soil. Farmers learned that the hard way. Add too much and crops struggled. So even something valuable had limits. Balance mattered. In parts of Asia, salt stayed tightly controlled by governments. In China, salt taxes funded walls, roads, armies. When salt income stayed strong, the state stayed stable. While when it faltered, trouble followed. Money isn't just coins, it's trust. And trust breaks easily. Across Africa, salt traveled through desert routes towards cities like Timbuktu. Gold moved north, salt moved south. Sometimes they were traded almost by weight. Imagine that. Salt weighed against gold. Sounds crazy today. But in hot regions where salt was scarce, it could be just as desired. Maybe more. Your body needs salt every day. It doesn't need gold. That changes everything. Think about that for a second. Around the same period in India, salt flowed through markets and villages. It flavored food, preserved fish, connected coastal towns to inland regions. Sharing salt became a symbol of trust in many cultures. Eat salt together, and you won't betray each other. That was the idea. Even language absorbed it. Worth your salt, meaning you're competent, reliable. Take it with a grain of salt, meaning don't believe everything at face value. A grain, just a tiny crystal, but loaded with meaning. Salt slipped into daily speech without anyone noticing. As centuries passed, the world widened. Ships crossed oceans, trade networks expanded, production scaled up. Evaporation ponds near the sea grew larger. Seawater sat in shallow pools. The sun did the work. Water disappeared. Salt remained. Compared to deep mining, this method was cheaper. Easier in some places. As production increased, salt slowly became less rare. And when something becomes less rare, power shifts. Governments tried to hold control, taxes remained, but the world wasn't as tightly closed as before. Then salt stepped into political conflict again, this time in India under British rule. The British placed a tax on salt. Even though India had miles of coastline and could produce its own, people weren't allowed to collect it freely. Everyone had to buy official salt. Rich, poor, village, city, no exceptions. Salt touches every person. At the shore, he bent down, picked up salty the shore, he bent down, picked up salty mud, and let it dry in his hand. Such a small action, but symbolic. He was breaking the law peacefully, showing how absurd it was to tax something so basic. Sometimes simple acts carry more weight than weapons. Salt had once helped build empires, and now it helped question one. From ancient miners to medieval smugglers to political protesters, salt stayed close to daily life and close to power. That thread never broke. And here's the interesting part. What started as survival became politics. What looked ordinary turned out to be deeply political. But that's not the end of it. Because once salt became cheap and common in the modern world, something else happened. Its meaning changed again. And when we get there, we'll end up right back at your table, with that quiet shaker sitting beside your plate, pretending it's just seasoning. When the 20th century rolled in, everything sped up. Machines replaced hands. Trains moved goods in days, not weeks. Ships grew massive. Factories hugged coastlines and rivers. And salt, quietly, adjusted to the new pace. Production got organized. Near the sea, salt fields stretched out like white sheets under the sun. Workers shifted water from pond to pond, each one a little drier than the last. The sun did most of the work. Evaporate, crystallize, repeat. It still took care and timing, but it wasn't as deadly as digging deep underground. Up north, in colder regions, rock salt mining improved too. Better drills, rail carts, fewer cave-ins, not perfectly safe, but better. Progress is usually like that, not dramatic, just gradual. As salt became easier to produce in huge amounts, the price fell. It wasn't worth more than silver anymore. It didn't decide wars directly, but it didn't lose importance either. It just changed shape, like water finding a new path. At home, salt became, normal, so normal people forgot its story. It sat next to pepper. It disappeared into bread dough, melted into soup. No one paused to think about caravans or tax laws while cooking dinner. Science stepped in next. Doctors began studying what salt actually does inside the body. Turns out it's not just flavor. As sodium, one of salt's key parts, helps nerves send signals, helps muscles move, keeps water balanced. Without balance, things go wrong. Too little salt and you feel weak, dizzy. Too much, and blood pressure rises. That's the force of blood pushing through your body. Too high and the heart works overtime. Not ideal. So salt shifted again, from treasure to health conversation. Governments found another use. In some countries, iodine was added to salt. Tiny amounts, just enough to support the thyroid, that small gland in your neck that controls energy and growth. In places where soil lacked iodine, people got sick. Adding it to salt was simple, cheap, effective, because everyone used salt. It was public health that didn't need headlines. Quiet improvement, one kitchen at a time. Funny, isn't it? In ancient days, salt protected food from decay, slow breakdown that ruins things. In modern times, it helped prevent disease. Same crystal, different role. That salt also slipped into industry. Glass, soap, chemicals, factories relied on it. It stopped being just a kitchen ingredient. It became infrastructure. And yet, on your table, it still looks the same. You probably buy it in a small packet. Costs almost nothing. Maybe refined and pure white. Maybe pink from Pakistan. Maybe grey from French sea fields. Packaging tells you stories, adds a bit of personality, and people argue over it now. Less salt, more salt. Sea salt versus table salt. Chefs talk about texture, how a large crystal crunches differently than fine powder. The same chemical makeup can feel sharper just because the grain is bigger. Kind of fascinating. Here's the quiet comparison. Salt today is cheaper than ever, easier to find, safer to make. But we think about it less than people did centuries ago. Less attention doesn't mean less importance, just different awareness. We obsess over phones, news cycles, deadlines. Meanwhile, a salt waits in the corner like it always has. Reliable, unbothered. Sometimes I think history isn't really about kings or battles at all. It's about everyday objects. The stuff that moves from one hand to another without ceremony. Salt links a desert trader, a medieval miner, Gandhi on a beach, and you making pasta on a Tuesday night. That's kind of incredible. There's a quiet sadness in it too. The miners underground, the traders crossing brutal heat, the workers standing in blinding salt fields. Most of their names disappeared, but their labor built economies, shaped laws, fed cities. And there's something almost poetic about that. A crystal so small connecting continents, funding armies, supporting children's health, becoming a symbol of freedom. When Gandhi bent down to pick up salt, he wasn't just holding minerals, he was holding meaning. And when a parent sprinkles salt over food, it's care. When friends share bread and salt, it's trust. Or look around your kitchen. Salt sits near oil and rice, maybe in a glass shaker, maybe in a chipped ceramic bowl. It falls in tiny white lines across dark food. And you probably don't think about Roman roads or African caravans while doing it, but the link is there. Next time you cook, pause, just for a second. Pick up a pinch. Feel how light it is, dry, almost nothing. And remember, this same substance once crossed mountains and oceans. It moved through laws and protests. It carried profit, money, power, and hope. It's not worth more than silver anymore. But in a quieter way, it still holds value. It reminds us that survival often depends on simple things, that value depends on need, that history hides in ordinary objects. There's something grounding about that. The world feels overwhelming most days. Fast, loud, complicated. Yet a tiny crystal connects centuries without saying a word. So later tonight, or tomorrow morning, like when you twist that shaker again, maybe the sound will land differently. Not louder, just deeper. As if your table carries more stories than it shows. And maybe, just maybe, you'll taste more than salt.